continue this as we go forward as the Institute, not only for researchers in coastal and marine sciences, but looking more broadly, and that is why the Research Management Office with Kwezi is involved as well. It's because we feel that we need to bring a community together to work towards equality and social justice within the research system, and not only based on women per se, because there are many atrocities against children and men in this world as well. So equality for all, I think, is what we should be striving for. So the little slogan that's been put there, stand for simple justice, equal opportunity and human rights, I think is what we should be aiming for and wanting to achieve. I'm really looking forward to today because I feel that the topics and the conversations we're going to have are well worth investigating and exploring. So if you have any questions or anything you'd like to ask, I do ask that you put that in the chat. And if we have opportunity to engage and talk with one another, please let's do so. We will try and keep to time. Hannah and Lisa are the people in the background who are going to start dinging bells or doing things if we find that we're talking or chatting too much. We also have a fun little break game that Lisa will explain a little bit later. We would like you to do during our little body break time. And I really would like to warmly welcome you to this online session. We would have loved to have had breakfast in the countryside like we did last year. We would love to have been able to hug and meet and greet like we are always wanting to do. But unfortunately, in these times, we are now back to online. And for this, I also really have to thank you for joining the online seminar, because I am aware of so many people who have online fatigue and are so busy with different meetings and have to carefully pick and choose what they would like to attend. So we are really honored you have chosen to attend this seminar and this session. So without further ado, I think we should get the program started. I do see that I've taken less than my 5 minutes allocated to me. Just before I hand over to Dr. Magwebi, our fearless DVC, who is new and is enthusiastic, and I must say an amazing person to work with in the short time that I've been blessed to work with her, so I'm looking forward to her presentation, is just to note the etiquette that's been on your ticket and there's on the screen in front of you, that if we can just keep ourselves muted and switch off our computers and only the speaker, I mean, not our computers, silly me, switch off our videos, but please just let the speakers have their videos on. This is also just as a courtesy to the speaker, but also it does help those of us who don't have stable bandwidth or Wi-Fi, unlimited Wi-Fi. Okay, over to you, Thandi. Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. And thank you for the warm welcome, Bernie. And thanks to the organizers and thanks to the people who have joined us. I'm going to share my presentation on the screen. And I note your comments when you sent the invite that this is a conversation and we shouldn't make it rigid, I must say. You didn't put it in those words. I would strive to do that, and I'm anticipating that we'll have a conversation at the end. Let me share my presentation. Let's see. Use slideshow. Right. Is this visible to everyone?
Yes, it is, and it's perfect. Thanks, Thandi.
All right. Thank you very much once again. The topic that you've asked me to touch on in the time allocated is equal opportunities for African women in research. And I've thought about it quite a lot. And the question that I have in my head is, Are there equal opportunities? And are there enough opportunities, and can we call them equal? Or are we striving for equal opportunities for women in research? And I'm going to start with just the world of science. If we're talking research, of course, we're talking science. Firstly, I want to repeat the same notion that's known, that science needs advocates. And I think we need to be vocal about this. As the world population is expected to surpass 9 billion people by 2050, science will be more important than ever to address the challenges we face in the world today. And women are at the center of that global population. But also we are seeing shifts in how we do things, in how we operate. We're seeing shifts in how we live. We have to reimagine, or there is reimagination of natural resource management, supply and demand of natural resources, including fossil fuels, minerals, water, etc. We'll experience a powerful transformation, and I think we are seeing this transformation as we speak, as people who are part of this kind of research looking at natural resources. I think you would attest to this. But also the shifting demographics that we see globally in terms of gender representation, in terms of age, as we know that Africa is a young population. And what does that mean for women in Africa? Digital transformation. Digitization is fundamentally changing how we interact in business, in academia, at home, in rural communities. It's affecting everyone. But are women not left behind because of this digital transformation? And how can we ensure that there is equal access to opportunities presented by digital transformation? The economic landscape is evolving. Economic influence is transitioning from dominance of the most developed countries towards other countries now. It's becoming a multipolar environment. But if I come back, having set that stage, what's happening globally, if we look at education, gender equality in education, it's important that we look at what the data is telling us. Because without that data, we are not able to detect how women and girls are affected and to what extent. Data is important to empower countries and stakeholders, from advocacy groups to engage citizens, so that we can better target initiatives and policies while benchmarking progress towards gender parity and equality in education. And this I'm referring to at all levels, from global levels of global policies, at national levels, at institutional levels, because we need this information so that policies can be revised, or new policies can be put forward to better support or to better enhance participation at all levels. The UNESCO Institute for Statistics shows that girls are still more likely than boys to never set foot in a classroom, despite the tremendous progress made over the last 20 years. This is not good news, considering the percentage of women in the population. It means if we do not do anything, if we don't transform our environments, we're going to be sitting with this problem 20 years from now. In research, as a women scientist or as a scientist in research, less than 30% of the world's researchers are women. Data always shows the extent to which these women work in public sector, in the private sector, in academia, as well as in research areas. So there is nuanced data to determine or to see how women are impacted. But the question that remains is, what are the factors or what are the barriers that deter women from pursuing careers in science and engineering and mathematics, or I can say, and technology? It's encouraging to note that new indicators about the dynamics that affect women's decision to pursue STEM careers is being developed. And this will be shared globally so that the policies at national and regional levels can be tracked. But participation disparities remain. Women in STEM fields publish less, we know that for sure. This data shows that. Women are paid less for their research compared to men or to their male counterparts. They do not progress as far as men in their careers, particularly in academia. We've seen this in our own countries, the studies that have been done that have shown a phenomenon which has been termed, controversially called, as a silent majority in academia, where most people or people who do not contribute to scientific or to knowledge production at universities. And it looks like most of these people are women, and women are impacted more. But there's very little information at even at our own national level to show the extent of these disparities. So there is a gap. But also women need to have a voice, and that voice is at decision-making powers. An example, a study that was done a couple of years, I think 2 or 3 years ago, by a colleague at the National Research Foundation, Dorothy, shows that in academies of science, for example, globally, only 12% of membership are women, is held by women. And this is, of course, a concern. So the gender gap in science remains. If we look at researchers globally, you will see from this graph, let me just move this. Sorry. You will see from this geographic location the share of total researchers globally in terms of women. And you see in Africa, it's very light in color, showing that it falls within the range of less than 30%. In our own country, in South Africa, we're sitting at about, I think, 45 or 50, 45% in academia. And this graph, don't worry about the small figures. What is shown on this side, if you can see my pointer, is participation of female researchers in sub-Saharan Africa, and the rest is Asia and the Pacific. And you can see from countries from Tunisia right up to Chad, the number of women as a percentage of total researchers declining. And South Africa sitting, as I said, at about 45%. So we do have a problem, and we need to emphasize that. I think this needs to be shown in every intervention that we are implementing at every level, to be able to show the difference between, or to recognize the difference between equality and equity. And the difference does matter. And to put it even more illustrious, in research, also social justice matters. And I've just shown, I like this picture a lot because it just described to everybody what we mean by equality and equity and by justice. And you can see if there's inequality, of course, there's people who can't access. And equality, but you've provided the tools, but you haven't provided the tools well enough to ensure that there's equity. You can see from this tree, for example, the fruit is still on one side, but justice is where you put the tree straight, the policies, the environments, so that everyone has access to opportunity. Now, towards equitable access of opportunity for women researchers globally, there are a few inroads that have been made, and I've just put a few examples of programs that are talking to increasing opportunity of access for women. I like this one, the Organization for Women in Sub-Saharan Africa. It offers PhD fellowships, and in South Africa, over 60% participation. It's an enabling environment that provides, for example, medical insurance, parental care support, conference support, regional science communication events. And this is specifically targeted for women because it takes cognizance and it recognizes that women have got different needs and women are not a homogeneous group. And there's also the African Women in Agricultural Research and Development. We know that 80% of the food that's produced in Sub-Saharan Africa is by women or by women smallholder farmers. And what does this mean for support for women to progress in this field? So the award fellowship offers 2 years fellowship, agriculture focus, and developing leadership skills so that we can develop women smallholder farmers. There's also mentoring opportunities and skills building opportunities. But also being visible and role modeling and storytelling in the sense of telling our stories is very important so that the younger generation can see how these stories, or can hear the stories, and they can see how people have emerged from different environments and circumstances to become where they are. And I think Dr. Mzilikazi participated in this. And it's a profile of South African women researchers, young female emerging researchers. And these are the stories of hope, of inspiration, and it includes all fields of science. And I think these are the projects that need to continue to be nurtured, to be promoted, and to continue to bring in diversity so that we can see and support women and young girls in science. We've seen many barriers to progression within academia, and these barriers particularly affect women. There are gender stereotypes, and as I said earlier, women are not a homogeneous group. There's these symbols, I've just put these symbols here just to illustrate how different we are. We cannot be confined to being a homogeneous or a binary group of male and female. It's important to recognize these distinctions. In academia, because we are in a higher education environment, I don't know if any of you have seen the Elsevier Gender Report that's looking at the gender, that's looking at research through a gender lens, and it's showing a changing landscape. There are a few pointers from this. The first one is the proportion of women among researchers from the countries that were looked at, 12 countries. It's looking over a 20-year period that the proportion of women among researchers is increasing. Women publish fewer research papers on average than men. That has not changed, but it doesn't show the impact of those papers. Women are less likely than men to collaborate internationally on research papers, and they are less likely than men to collaborate across academic and corporate sectors on research papers. Among researchers, women are generally less internationally mobile than men. And I think these are the things that we know, but it's important that this is not, this is shown through research. Gender research is growing in terms of size and complexity, and with the new topics emerging over time. Now, our collective responsibility is to promote gender equality in science. And I'm emphasizing the STEM, but actually I should be saying STEAM to include the arts, because we now need more multi and transdisciplinarity more than ever. But also we need to advance understanding of the impact of gender, sex, and diversity in research, supporting the SDG 5 to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And also, it's encouraging to see the Global Research Council statement on principles and actions promoting the equality and status of women in research. Moving forward, within our own university, we aim to determine the extent of barriers to research activity within the university, particularly focusing on women, so that we can be able to have focused interventions to promote progression within academia. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm looking forward to other presentations and a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thandi. That was really interesting and I enjoyed it. And I think perhaps some of the reports and the articles that you referred to, we could possibly put links on the webpage for others to go and read if they have not seen them. And if there are any questions, we'll hold them over to the next, when we have an opportunity to chat. It is my pleasure to introduce Jessica to you. She is from the business school here. Jessica has always been a support. I consider her a friend, even though we sometimes disconnect from each other over time, especially with this distance. We haven't seen each other in years, it feels like, Jessica. But we are looking forward to your contribution. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Snow. Let me just share my screen. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to try and slow down as much as possible. Thank you very much to Dr. Mgwebi for laying the foundation for us in giving us the big picture perspective. I really appreciate all of your statistics and the research that went into your presentation. So very well done. We appreciate the foundation.
Thank you.
So my topic is on the fact that research is gender neutral. It's one of the things that is classic in terms of Dr. Snow figuring out that this is a plus point for us to be conducting research, that no one can say to us that topic is taboo, that topic is for boys only, we're not strong enough to be able to do it. So I enjoy the fact that I got this topic. And I would like to thank the CMI for including the management sciences in today's discussion. We really appreciate that we can collaborate with CMI. I think it's a very fruitful collaboration, and we've had many fun times already liaising with international academics as well. So my universal truth is that there will always be someone who's richer than you, skinnier than you, and more eloquent. So I grew up as the youngest of 11 children from the same mother and father. My mom had another previous marriage, so she also gave us another sister. So out of the 12 siblings, we were 7 women and 5 boys. So immediately you would think that that would be a dangerous situation for the females in the house. But I'm happy to say that our parents made sure that everybody learned how to cook. They learned how to clean the house. In the contrary, also, everybody had to learn how to change the tire on a car. So the only discrimination that I can remember is the sequence of who actually learned to drive first. Because obviously the boys are more adventurous, so they'll definitely learn to drive first. So in life, people will always say there's a lot of inequality. You should strive to be ambitious. And as a workaholic, I think I've basically worked myself to the bone, to the point of burnout, with trying to accomplish things and and be better. And obviously being in the industry, you quickly find out that there's a lot of pressure to perform, including your performance bonus or your 13th, 14th or 15th check being linked to your personal performance in a business environment. So from a competitive perspective, yes, competition exists, but competition is also healthy. So as we grow older, I've obviously now figured out that there are some things that I can change, and I must strive to do my best to change it. But there are some things that I definitely can't change, and I must just accept it, which makes me a much happier person. So if we look at the effect of this pandemic, since lockdown struck us in March, we figured out quickly that the historic inequalities have just aggravated the circumstances when people were forced to go into lockdown. I think the sad part was the fact that people didn't have savings to be able to stock up on food, and then thereby protecting their own health. The stories that we've heard of lesser skilled people who were then forced to go work in essential services like the production facilities and the factories. And the fact that they then exposed themselves to the COVID-19 virus, but because of the trade-off that they had to make, you either work or you don't eat. This is an economic reality that we cannot deny. So if you look at the South African context from an economic perspective, people will say we've had 1994, we've had democratic elections, but we couldn't just with one vote wipe out the historic reality of unequal access to resources. So to give you an example, if we look at access to education, out of my 12 siblings, I'm the only one that managed to get to a doctorate level. If we compare our experiences from a school going perspective, then it was sad to know that you had to literally, I saw my siblings get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to catch a bus or a train to go to a neighboring town, in the process driving past the school, which they were not allowed to access because their skin was the wrong color. So if you think of today's circumstances as well, there is still unequal access to education, and there's still a stigma attached to whether people should go to university or whether they should go to vocational training. And this is something that we, as academics and people in education and in government, we should really work much harder to try and alleviate the perception that your education is only good enough if you go to a university environment. Because from a skills training perspective, we know that not everyone is suited to the disciplined environment of being in the university environment, which is also okay, because we are all unique and individual people. So if I have to give you an examples from the fact that we're not all in the same boat, I know some people who complained to me that the electricity bill was too high. So I asked them, how much is your electricity bill? And they said, well, 12,000 Rand. And that's for the residents. So a 12,000 Rand electricity bill on your residence is definitely, I'm definitely not in that league. On the other hand, one of my students from the University of Pretoria, she graduated and became the CEO of her own project management company. So we ran into each other at the Port Elizabeth airport, and she said, oh, she's really struggling to get 20 million out of the one client, because, you know, she needs to pay the wages of her staff. And I thought that's all very interesting, you know, negotiation skills, whatever. And then she said, but on top of it, she's very upset because even though she's a CEO, she went to a business meeting. And afterwards, the one gentleman who was sitting on her board or something, he basically said to her that he feels sorry for her, even though the company is doing well. He feels sorry for her because she's still unmarried. So regardless of how much money you have or the fact that your title says CEO of a big company, society and cultural norms will still look down on you if you are unmarried and a CEO. And the funny thing is, to add insult to injury, she said that he was going to speak to his wife to make sure that she becomes his second wife in order to in order to add to her image with her being the CEO and still being unmarried. So yes, we are all in this together, but some of us are not being treated equally, even if we are supposedly successful. So since 2015, when I had the privilege of supervising some of the MBA students, so for those of you who don't know, the business school actually has a lot of empowered women in industry, in businesses, in private sector, in public sector, and also women who run their own businesses. So the ones that I've been privileged enough to supervise in this time period from 2015 to 2020, if you look at the topics, and I'm hoping that you can see all of the topics: internet fraud, automotive manufacturing, port congestion, lean warehousing, ERP in bakeries, electric cars, ESCOM maintenance, Africa and mobile payments, freight forwarding, sustainable Louis Vuitton, port management information system risks, and port business-to-business efficacy. If I have to ask you which one of those topics you think were run by the female MBA students, you would all probably guess sustainable Louis Vuitton, because that's the girly kind of thing to do, because you go look at the crocodile farms and you figure out whether Louis Vuitton is actually sustainable in their business practices from a procurement perspective. But the truth of the matter is that of these 12 topics, 7 of them were conducted by women and 5 were gentlemen. So the business world has changed in terms of the profile of the women that are investing in from an MBA perspective, because they are actually building skills for the future. So what we focus on in the business school environment is to teach about leadership. So when you want to start a new business, people say you need to have a characteristic of locus of control. But there's a distinction between having locus of control from an internal perspective, which means you are in charge of your own ship, or from an external perspective, which means you are still affected by things that happen around you. And what we're trying to teach our students is things like budgeting and personal finance. Universities always look to the business school to create jobs and save people's jobs, but we also should be teaching the art of negotiation or conflict resolution or anger management, or even dealing with mental health issues like depression. So from my personal perspective, I am teaching on operations management and lean enterprise, but the truth of the matter is that from my external research focus areas, since 2012, I've been teaching a lot of retail managers with the wholesale and retail theater. And for me, the important thing about research is that it must be tangible to the normal average Joe and average Josephina in the street. So with the collaboration of IORA, CMR, NRF, SAON, I was able to follow the fish. And if you look at the retail environment, you see just one little product, the John West tuna in a can. And I was able to see that if you visit the Seychelles, that the tuna that we catch in our waters are actually being processed in the Seychelles and comes back as an import product. So things like these are only possible, research studies like these are only possible when we all collaborate, and when the funding opportunities that are there, we take advantage of it, because again, it's not gender specific. So in a nutshell, what I would like to conclude is that the research is gender neutral, but it's more effective when it includes everybody, all spheres of society, all disciplines in an academic environment. And from a social justice and economic empowerment perspective, the results must be able to benefit everybody. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you so much for keeping to time as well with the interesting topic. And I think we also thoroughly enjoyed some of your own personal experiences. I know I always love how you related back to personal experiences, and I think that touches home because many have experienced similar situations. Although I do have to say I only have one brother, so, and I'm not from a family of 12 going forward, and I felt that was challenging enough. So well done for surviving siblings and having that support. It is my great pleasure now to introduce Danai, who will take over now from Jessica. Danai is a colleague of mine in development studies. I think she's also one of the most passionate academic mentors that I know currently, and she puts so much of herself into it. I applaud her for standing up in the morning and still having a smile on her face with everything that she does. So thank you so much, Danai, for taking the time to present to us today.
Thank you, Bernie, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak today. And thank you to Dr. Mgwebi and Dr. Fraser for their presentations, very interesting. So I'm going to kind of change the pace a little bit. I don't have a presentation. I thought I would just kind of chat about a few things related to the topic. When I received the invitation, the suggested topic was equality in education. So I decided to stick with that. And as I was preparing to give the talk, I reflected a lot on what equality in education actually means, especially for me, who's been in the education space for a while. As a student, and now I am working as a lecturer, and so yeah, I reflected a lot about my experiences on both sides. At the moment, I'm teaching in development studies, as Bernie's mentioned, and one of the modules that I teach is called Contemporary Development Issues, and in that module we deal with different issues that we are facing at the moment, and equality, gender equality and education is one of those, a couple of those issues that we discuss. And there have been some very interesting conversations that have taken place in my classroom on those topics, and it's been interesting for me to observe what making myself sound old now, but what the younger generation is saying about these issues and how they feel about it and how they see that it affects them. So yeah, very interesting conversations that I've had with my students. But getting back to what I wanted to talk about, I kind of decided to look at this thing and trying to answer this question. At first, I looked at it from a bigger global perspective and looked at what is, you know, what is the global community saying about gender equality and education, and so looking at the Education 2030 agenda, equality in education means for them and for us, I suppose, implementing an approach that ensures that girls and boys, women and men not only gain access to and complete education cycles, but are empowered equally in and through education. When I initially thought about equality in education, I immediately, as a woman, I immediately thought about women and girls and their access. And I liked this statement, particularly because it addresses the fact that there needs to be equality for men and women, for boys and girls. And this is something that I've kind of had to navigate as I've been teaching. Anyway, so we are nearing the end of a very difficult year. We're August 2020, and even though there's been a great deal of progress made globally, there's still a very big gender gap that exists when we look at access to and continuation in education. And this is something Dr. Mgwebi touched on in her presentation. And the majority of the time, this has a negative impact on girls and on women. They kind of feel the brunt of these issues. And the most recent statistics published by UNESCO show that around 60 million girls will never set foot in a classroom. And that kind of shocked me a little bit. And 750 million, there's about 750 million adults without basic literacy skills, and 2/3 of that number is women. And when you start to delve into these statistics, it kind of becomes a little depressing to see, you know, the situation that we're currently in. And on top of that, you know, women and girls, there are a number of obstacles that they are facing in order to be able to gain access to education, to be able to reap the benefits of education. There's poverty, there's geographic isolation, minority status, disability, early marriage and pregnancy, gender-based violence, and, you know, traditional and cultural attitudes about the role and the status of women in society. And so they are contending with all of these obstacles, and then you throw in a global pandemic, which has had really devastating impact on the world. And as far as education is concerned, the impact on girls will certainly be significant. We are not sure when, you know, things are actually going to get better. And around the world, a lot of schools are closed, and so a lot of children are not able to go to school. And this has had a more of a significant impact on girls. And many of those that go to school, that are able to go to school, will be able to continue their education once schools open, but there will be a significant number of those girls that won't ever be able to go back to school. So that was kind of the global perspective for me, and it was a little bit bleak. So I thought, okay, let me narrow it down to my own perspective in terms of the space that I am in, and thinking about what equality in education means for those I interact with. And so I took a little chance, and I decided to contact a bunch of my students, past and present, and ask them what they thought equality in education meant. Now, I'll admit that I didn't actually expect a single one of them to get back to me, because I figured, you know, with everything that they are dealing with right now, doing a favor for their old lecturer would be very, very low on their priority list. But fortunately, I actually got some responses, which I was really excited about. And I just wanted to share a few of those. So the one student said that equality in education for her means receiving the same amount of attention and standard of teaching from lecturers as her peers, regardless of her background. And that her acquired level of education will carry the same value as another person with the same level of education, regardless of gender or race in the workplace. The second student said that he felt that equality in education meant that every individual who so desires should have the opportunity to pursue studies regardless of their background. With more people entering the learning space, he said that this would result in a collision of contrasting ideas or opposing ideas, giving learners from different walks of life an opportunity to share an environment which promotes debate and nurtures understanding. And I particularly like that point, because it's something that I try and do in my classroom. especially when we are talking about contemporary issues, because everybody has opinions and not everyone is particularly comfortable with sharing that. But at the end of the day, we are in an education space and we need to be able to express those opinions and learn from each other. The next student said that equality in education means fairness and no judgment based on race, gender, or status. And it means that no one is deprived of the right to education. And she also added that we need to think about it. We need to also think about the difference between equality and equity, and this is something Dr. Webby mentioned in her presentation as well. And then the next student said that equality in education would mean financial independence for women. It would mean more contributions by women in the fields of science, commerce, and the arts, and it would mean that in the near future, women would dominate the labor market and the financial power would be more in their hands, and it would mean a better future for our daughters. And so these were the thoughts of the people that I interact with. And then I thought, okay, I need to actually answer this question for myself. What does equality in education mean for me? And it took some time for me to actually decide on one particular answer. I had big conversation in my head, lots of debate. And my initial thoughts centered around the things that I know and teach about gender equality in education, how important it is to educate the girl child and what that means for the individual and society at large. I thought about it from the perspective of me being a teacher and what it means as far as my interaction with my students are concerned, wanting to ensure that everyone in my class is given the best chance at success, even if it means, like for me, just the best chance at successfully completing the module that they're doing with me. And then eventually I came to the conclusion that for me, equality in education means the freedom to make choices. My mom was a primary school teacher, and so education was always top priority growing up. She really pushed my sisters and I to work hard at school because she always told us that she never wanted us to depend on anyone later in life. And that really stuck with me. And I realized that if I was part of a society or a community that feels that only boys should be educated, I wouldn't have been able to make a lot of choices. I wouldn't have had the freedom to make a lot of choices. I wouldn't have been able to make choices about my body. I mean, we're in 2020 and there's still a lot of cultures that practice female genital mutilation. I wouldn't be able to make choices about my health. Maternal deaths are still very high, and statistics show that they are significantly reduced when mothers have even just a primary level of education. I wouldn't be able to make choices about my child's health if I had a child. And statistics show that, when mothers are educated, and even if it's just a primary school level of education, it improves child nutrition. I wouldn't be able to make a choice about who I marry or when that happens, because we see that the higher the level of education that a girl has, reduces the likelihood of them being forced into child marriage. I wouldn't be able to make choices about my future, and the list goes on. But ultimately, I wouldn't have the freedom to make those choices. So although many of the statistics seem quite bleak, and gender inequality persists in education, there have been quite a few strides made and there has been progress made in the last 20 years. There's still a long way to go, but more women and girls are able to exercise their right to education and are enjoying the benefits of that access. And that includes the freedom to make choices. And I will leave it at there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Danai, and thank you for bringing it from the statistics to something that's personal to you and your experiences. It's much appreciated, and as with Jessica, I think bringing in our experiences and our own learning and our own thought process, even in the world of academia, is important, and to have the safe spaces to do so. Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce and ask Dr. Mawela, who is the George Campus Principal, to present to us now. I don't know Dr. Mawela very well. We have not really been introduced, so I'm actually really looking forward to your presentation. And I'm also looking forward to getting to know you a lot better and interacting with the George Campus as well. So if I can't see if Dr. Mawela is online, but the floor is yours.
Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning.
Are you able to see me?
Yes.
Yes, we're able to see and hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to do this presentation. And I'm honored that I am presenting with all the women that you have chosen for me to present with. I am new at the George campus. This is my 5th month. So when I started at the George campus, I started 2 weeks before the first lockdown was announced. And the lockdown period has got me reflecting a lot on a few things, hence my topic for this session. So let me share a little bit about what the lockdown means for me today. I left my house and my family, or my household, to come for a week's orientation at the NMU. And that week's orientation was going to be followed by a week in George. And so everything went the way it was supposed to go, and I was supposed to return to my house and my family in Gauteng so I can pack house and come this side. I have my spouse, I have an 8-year-old. Everything was planned, everything was predictable, everything was known, everything was scheduled. And so just before I had to go back, the president announced the first lockdown, which was 3 weeks. So here I am in PE with one bag and a week's worth of clothes. My flight gets cancelled. Do I go back to George? Do I go back to Gauteng? Do I stay in PE? And so I decide maybe I should stay in PE. And so it's only just 3 weeks. And so it happens that in that period of thinking, let me stay for 3 weeks in PE, that the household guest house that I was accommodated at, the manager and owner approaches me and said, this is not going to work. You have 6 hours to vacate, and the lockdown starts at midnight. I have no place to stay in George, and I have no relative in George. I have no relative in PE. Do I drive 11 hours to Gauteng from PE? Do I drive 5 hours from PE to George? So what do I do with my child who's 8, who's thinking I'm coming back in a week's time? Fast forward 5 months later, I'm united with my family. In that period, I have survived a very unpredictable period, not only of my life, but of starting a new job, of being in a new place, of being far from home. And I've seen an incredible amount of generosity within that period. This generosity started with a teaspoon, which I didn't have, a mattress, which I didn't have. It started also with me calling to find guest houses after I decided I'm going to drive back to George, finding guest houses as I'm driving on the highway from PE to George, and arriving in George, finding a rental apartment in the middle of the highway, and arriving in George to find an artisan from the NMU with a bed waiting. An administrator with a kettle waiting, a buildings manager with a chair and a table. And in essence, someone else also joined in with a blanket. So I decide I have what it takes to be the new George campus or NMU campus principal. I have a bed, I have a chair, I have a teaspoon, 1 plate, and a fork, and 1 pot. I don't have a mop, so I'm going to go and buy a mop. I can buy a mop, but I can't buy a bucket because it's not allowed. It got me thinking, what kind of a campus principal starts a job and doesn't have a bed, cannot go home, doesn't have a car, doesn't have a blanket, doesn't have all these things that have been planned that are predicted. Most of the people that we're talking about in this forum who are marginalized, be it women, be it children, be it victims of one type of violence or the other, be it people from rural communities, be it researchers who are women and mothers and wives and caregivers of elderly parents, be it those things all put together and the additional challenge of being disabled, have pretty much an unpredictable life and landscape to navigate. So what does it mean to lead during this time? We know our landscape and the research that Dr. Mkwebi is relating to, the work that Dr. Fraser is speaking to, the work that we all are going to present on here, basically says we know our landscape, but our landscape has just got more complicated. The facts and figures that we know as we know them are changed because for the first time in our humanity's history, we are in despair, we are uncertain, we are feeling, and we are needing to stop and reflect. We are needing to contemplate our own mortality, whilst at the same time having to lead others. So what does it mean to lead today when everything is unpredictable? What does it mean to lead when we don't know the landscape or how it is going to be 6 months from now, when we are losing people on a daily basis, when we are infected, affected ourselves, when we are reeling from hurt and pain, when we are locked up, when we are... So it got me really thinking. My own experience during this period made me realize how confined the spaces that we have projected over decades on the marginalized are. The space of not having, the space of being isolated, the space of being disconnected, the space of being helpless, the space of panic, the space of incredible hardship. And in my view, it will take a lot more than knowing the landscape for us to be able to change the conditions of those individuals, communities of marginalized people, be it women, be it children, being researchers who are women, being the disabled, being victims of gender-based violence. It will take a lot more than knowing the facts and figures. It will take a lot more than that to even lead by example. It will take our own humanity in order to reach out to those individuals, our own humanity to take the risk that is necessary for us to be able to put our feet on the ground, feel, see, hear, despair, hope, in order for us to be responsive. One of the things that frustrates me about all the work that we do as researchers, as scientists, and I am a researcher myself, as leaders, is we are not moving from that space of recognizing the lack, the inaccess, the inequity. We are not moving. And we need to move. We need to be desperately needing to move forward. We need to act. The policies that we have in our universities, the programs that we have in our universities, the cultures that we have in the universities of being able to exercise right over others, marginalizing those, the cultures of not inviting those who are in the shadows, in the corners, to participate in leading, in co-creation, in recommitting, in re-engaging those same principles that the university values of inclusion, of leading ourselves first, and more importantly, of being able to see, to hear, to feel, and to be mindful of those that we are leading. So what will it take, in my view, for me to be a leader of the marginalized? It will take my own vulnerability. That's what it will take. So I'm encouraging us. Yes, we have those numbers. We have those facts and figures. We know what we haven't been able to achieve, but what will we do now to create that access, that inclusion, that change that the person next to us needs, so that they can be that mom who sits and does work at home and not have to cope with all those things? What will it take for us to change the men in our society so that they will be responsive and we reduce the condition of gender-based violence? It will take participation. We need to invite as many people as we can. So if you haven't heard anything I've said today, is our own vulnerability needs to lead us to act, to create agency for those marginalized individuals, communities, and groups that we know so much about. We need to act. We need to see. We've learned we need to see and act and hear and listen to hear, because unless we do, we won't be like those people who brought for me that fork, that plate. Those people who put themselves in my vulnerability, they led me with their hearts. It took their own vulnerability for them to see, I'm far from home, I'm far from my child, I have a need. And meeting those basic needs is what it's going to take for us to do right, at the right time and for the right reason, for all the marginalized communities in our universities and in our society. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for that. I'll switch my video off for this one. I've found that very touching, but I'm going to hand over to Hannah and Lisa, and we'll talk later. Hannah, if you can take over, please, or Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Wonderful talks by all of you. So we're going to have a bit of a break now. But before we go for our comfort break, we've got a little bit of a game or questionnaire that we'd like you guys to try your hand at. No Googling, watching you. So I'm going to share a poll now. And I would like you guys to give a thumbs up if you can see us. And I'm going to leave this up for the duration of our break. The break will be from now until 10:30. And please, during this time, go do whatever you need to do. And also vote on what you think the correct answers are of these questions. So go ahead, vote. And we'll let you know the answers as when we return at about 10:30, 10:25. So thank you all. Please feel free to go do what you need to do. Thanks, everybody. We will be back at around 10:25 to give you the answers and to continue with the program.
Hi, Hannah. Have people responded?
Yes, we've got the majority of everybody has responded. There's about 7 people that haven't. If you guys would like to
Still can't hear
finish.
you, even though you're unmuted.
Can you not hear me? Can you hear me now, Bernie?
No, I can't hear you.
Bernie, can you hear me?
I can hear all of you.
I can hear you, Lisa. Can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up if everybody else could hear me. Okay, Haley can. Thanks. The submit button.
I'll just send a WhatsApp to Bernie.
Okay.
7 is going to respond. One of them is me because I know all the answers, so I'm not going to keep.
You have an unfair advantage, Lisa.
I scratch forever to find all of these things. So they're ingrained in the brain.
Someone says the submit button for the poll isn't working. That's odd. It should be. I haven't ended the poll yet, but I will in the next minute. Weird. Okay, I think I'm going to end the poll before we run out of time, so we can just have a quick look at the answers. Last call. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Bernie.
Okay, I can hear you now. I don't know what was going on.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll, everybody.
Did you see that Tandy couldn't press the submit button?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to help. Amara said also she is also
don't worry about it. It's fine.
It's just a game. It's not for points.
Yes.
We're all winners.
It's fine.
Okay, I'm going to share the results with you all, and you can have a look. So I will go through the answers with you shortly. Let me just share my screen so I can show you. There you go. Okay, so you can also see the results are up. I see the majority of you got question 1 correct, and question 2, and question 3, and question 4. Question 5 was a bit of a tight battle there. Not everybody is a bit sure on that one. And I think number 6 was quite straightforward. To be honest, number 7 had me a bit stumped because the names of the ministers I always tend to forget. So I would have probably said B, but I would have been wrong. The answer is A. And yeah, and definitely number 9. I see a lot of you watching Carte Blanche. To be honest, I don't use my TV, so I don't really watch Carte Blanche that often. And yeah, last question. 50% of you got correct, and some of you did not. But yeah, thanks guys for participating. Really appreciate it. And thought that made you think a bit about who fits in where. And yeah, I think we can move on to the next thing on the agenda, which should, oh wait, we've got 5 more minutes still. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
You're jumping ahead.
It was a
So
prize.
sorry.
Not a problem. I think maybe we can, yeah, the earphones work and then they don't work for some reason. I think that, is there anyone who you can see who did get everything right, Hannah?
So I can't see who voted for what, unfortunately, but no Kwezi, no prize. I'm so sorry.
Well, we wanted to surprise someone with a prize, so it's a pity that we can't tell
We
who
can't
won.
see who.
All are winners then. Is there anyone who will honestly put up their hand and say you got it all right? Then you win the prize. No one put up their hand. Cloverly, you got them all right? Cool, so Cloverly says she's got them all right.
Yes, I did. I got them all right.
Good, excellent. I don't see anyone else who's done that. No one else put up?
I see a thumbs up by Haley.
Haley, did you also get them all right?
Yes, I did. I just didn't know how to put up my hand. I'm sorry.
And Jessica said she got it all right. Okay, well, we were going to surprise, so the three of you will be surprised with something. We'll get a hold of you. So Hannah, make note of Cloverly, Jessica, and Haley.
Yay, exciting. Thanks, Bernie.
Yes, they're going to be, we will need your address where you're going to be at, so it can be delivered under COVID.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Addresses.
Thank you.
Lisa, okay, you can just send the addresses to me and I'll make a plan with something next week. But I can also just pop you an email to remind you. Let me just do that now while we wait.
Perfect. All right, well, while we're waiting for maybe more people to arrive and for our session to start, we've got 3 more minutes left in that. First of all, I need to apologize for leaving in tears at the last session. But thank you so much for sharing. It was really, I think, heartfelt and also echoed the sentiments, I think, of a lot of people either on this call or who we have been engaged with during these different lockdown levels and what they've been going through. So it was really, I think, a heartfelt thank you for sharing from the heart, and also for the call to action and the need to operationalize what we put in place. So we develop principles and guidelines, but we need to find ways of bringing these into action and making tangible changes as we go forward in our research. And I think that was an important message I gained from it. Is there anyone who would like to comment on any of this morning's speakers or ask a question or echo any of the sentiments of the first set of speakers? Please, if you can raise your hand. If you can't find the raise your hand button, then unmute yourself. And I'm just going to ask Hannah to help me see who does that, if anyone would like to comment. I don't see anyone. Am I missing anybody? No?
I see Cloverly.
Cloverly, sorry, yes, Cloverly, if you can
Yes,
unmute
it's
yourself,
just,
you can go ahead.
just something to add, because I could relate so much to all the speakers so far in terms of my journey as a woman, you know, in having, you know, pursuing a career in science. And something else that came up, we did a study for the NRF once to find out why we were not getting particularly women of color in postgraduate studies. And the responsibility, especially if you're the only member of your family that made it into university, you know, there's a lot of responsibility to take care of your family thereafter, especially up to your first degree, maybe your second degree, and beyond that, you know, it's almost impossible. So that's also something culturally that has been quite restrictive in how much further women can go in science careers. just because there's the family responsibility, of course, your own family, but then your parents and your siblings, that there's also an expectation to give back there. Yeah. So I just wanted to add that as something that's been, quite real in many women's lives.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Cloverly.
Yeah.
Hayley, I saw you had your hand up and it's put down again. Do you still want to say anything?
Oh, thanks, Bernie. I just wanted to say how much I've enjoyed this morning, actually. I've thoroughly appreciated the mix of the presentations from a point of view of like women in science, women in international platforms through the eyes of something like the UN, and the personal experiences. I just wanted to say that this has been great, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Hayley. All right, I see that it's now time to move on. We'll have more opportunity to chat thereafter. Thank you for those who have joined us again for the second session. Those that have joined us and weren't with us earlier this morning, thank you very much for coming online. I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Shale, who is the acting director within...
Not for long.
Not for long. All right. Well, I'm not going to go into too much detail then. Denise can say a little bit more. But I've also known Denise as a fellow researcher and colleague and friend for quite a long time, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. Denise, please go ahead.
I'm just trying to get, I practiced trying to get this shared screen, and of course it was a delay, so hang on.
No problem.
You know how it goes.
Yes.
Now what have I done? Okay, I think everyone can see a screen now.
Not yet, but it will come on.
Not yet.
Okay. It'll happen eventually.
Yeah. Have you done the little share screen thingy at the bottom?
I did.
Okay.
I thought I did. Oh, you know what I didn't do? You're right. Okay, I'm here for comic relief, essentially. Especially after that. Okay, there we go. This is what happens when vanity gets the better of you and you take your glasses off.
There you go. We can see
there we
it
go.
now.
Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. Yes, the talks have been great, and I think what I'm going to be doing actually builds more on that. And now I'm thinking, I wish I had seen everyone's talks beforehand, because then I'd cut some of this out. But anyway, my topic for my sins, if I can get this is very slow. Let's see, it's not changing its slide. So just bear with me. Okay, so, there we go. Leadership by Women in Science. I've shortened it a little bit. Transcending circumstances and expectations to lead effectively. We've gotten some background already from the previous speakers in terms of the starting points. So we all know that we basically are on the shoulders of those who came before us. And we, in our personal lives, we try and lead within our research groups or our different positions in our lives. And none of this really is possible without the many women around the world who allowed us to get there. And I think it's really important for us to reflect on that and to basically understand that we are not alone. Sometimes we feel alone, and there are circumstances such as our current COVID, or just in general societal pressures that we feel alone. But we've had lots of pioneers in the world that can help lead us and show us that within our disciplines, within the scientific, it doesn't have to be just purely the natural sciences, but all sciences, social sciences, etc., that we have been led by giants, and we stand on their shoulders and we move forward. But that being said, as Dr. Mgwebi and other speakers have said, is that globally, UNESCO has found that women make up less than 30% of the world's researchers. which is not right. We are over 50% of the world's population. We make up less than 30% of the researchers, but we also see that coming into universities, undergraduates, postgraduates, especially in the bachelor, undergraduate and postgraduate, that women are generally at least 50 or if not more % of the enrollments. What you see on this graphic here is actually about medical school, but this holds and transcends other fields as well, where you see 50% of women entering, but once you get higher up in leadership positions, 16% of these become deans in their medical campuses or medical schools, 15% department chairs, 21% as full professors. So we definitely see sort of an attrition throughout the woman's career, and we'll talk a little bit about why we aren't ascending to those leadership roles or what could be the barriers. But there's an Australian group that published in The Connection that showed a lovely infographic about, they looked specifically at scientific societies, specifically zoological in this case, but I think it also can be translated in other societies, and looked at the numbers of women who play a prominent role on boards or in the directorate of these different scientific societies. And you can see quite clearly there is a definite difference depending on geographic location. So if you look here, globally, it's about, you know, 3/4 is men or 2/3 men, 1/3 women. The pie charts are the numbers of women involved in the upper structures of the societies. The bar charts here are the percent of these societies that actually have specific equality preambles or directives in their constitutions. And the female symbol is the average number of women who serve as either the chair or the director or secretary in basically leadership roles in the societies. So globally, we see it's an average of 1 woman per society, and about 19%. But if we look across, you see Asia and South America are particularly bad. They're about 1/4 or less representation of women. Australasia is actually the best, and followed by North America and Europe. And Africa, in terms of its global perspective, is actually not as bad as one would have expected. So what we see is that we are a little over 1/4 have representation in our societies, but our societies aren't necessarily highlighting. Only 7% of those societies are highlighting bringing in equity and bringing women into the leadership, and only 0.8 of us serve as the chairperson or the president of these societies across Africa. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of elevating ourselves within our societal structures, our university structures, our workplace structures. This is also from the US, from the National Science Foundation, but the statistics I've seen for South Africa very much echo this. So you can see at the very top, the number of the proportions, so women being on the right and men on the left, that there are actually more women going into undergraduates, postgraduate, and in masters. Where we have the flip or the switch is in the doctorates, and that's where we start to decline. And then as you get further up in the university structure, basically we have the inverse, where by the time it becomes a dean or a president or a DVC, each university is different, you see a outrageously disproportionate number of men in these leadership positions to that of women. I think in South Africa, we echo this, although I think it's changing. And if you look at our university, we can be quite proud to see that our upper structures are very nicely representative and have women at the helm. But this is recent, and this is in the United States in 2015. If you look at a DHET CREST report, and I've circled the male and female part, one of these days I'll convert the graphics so it's useful. But what we see likewise is that the representation of women to men at a professorial level is not the same. You know, it's 30% in the professoriate versus, you know, almost 60% men. So we really need to work harder towards bringing that equity. It's not just, I must say, I've really appreciated Dr. Mgwebi's tree picture, and that really does show where we are in our context, in that now we've sort of been each given a ladder, but not everyone's getting equal access to the fruit and to the tree. So there's definitely not the social justice and equity, and there's definitely not equity. So we're still needing to get there, and there are programs from DHET and the university trying to redress this. But looking outside a university structure, this is also from the US, we see that leadership by gender and race in like laboratory directors or directors of institutes, 5% white women, no women of color in the United States in 2019, which is outrageous. And then in non-STEM leadership roles, we see white women increasing. There at least is a presence of women of color in that. But in general, not even 50%. And we make up more than 50% of the global population. So there's a lot of work that we need to do to get into that. And so what is leadership? Leadership really isn't a gender, it's gender neutral. I mean, but what do we bring as women into our leadership roles? What is our position in this, and what do we give? That, so we tend to be more task focused. I think a little bit more focused in what we have to do. I think because we see the urgency, we see the need, and we want to do well. We tend to be more collaborative, and of course women are on a spectrum. We are not all one, so different people have different traits, but we also tend to be more communication centric, even if we can talk or not, centered in terms of how we run our teams, how we deal with the people that we collaborate with and go forward with, and we're about bringing people together, unification and accountability. Women tend, you know, once again, generalization, to be accountable for their actions and for the actions of their teams, and to lead from the front, to make sure that we're pushing the collective together. And we also bring in a diversification. So if we only have one type of person always leading an institution, you only have one point of view, one idea, one direction to go. So the more we get a better representation at those higher levels, we are able then to get a diversity of ideas and move the collective forward. Okay. And so what are the barriers to our leadership? And I really liked this graphic because it really shows, and I think it really illustrates what's happening to us now with the lockdown, being home, being with the children, being with, and trying to do our jobs. So, you know, we feel that there are these glass ceilings. We can only get so far because we don't have, you know, there's this gender disparity. We're not seen. We're not heard sometimes in meetings. There's a study that shows that, you know, the proportion of women of color and women and white women in leadership roles that actually are just neutralized by their male counterparts. We don't see as many women in leadership positions as we would like. The social structure isn't there to support us. So then we end up hitting those glass ceilings a bit more, feeling those disparities and seeing the fact that, you know, we aren't able to go forward because we don't have the childcare we need. We don't have the family support we might need to leave at a certain position to support family. A lot of political apathy. They say, okay, well, you have equal rights. We've made these changes, now just get on with it and stop complaining. And that is, I think, within institutions and nationally, something that we need to continue to push. Yes, we've made great strides, but we're not there yet. And I put this in yellow. I'm trying to keep with the theme in our colors, work-life balance. So that's what this picture encompasses for me, is that we're trying to cook our dinner and see to our children, and in this pandemic, sometimes being away from the children, as Dr. Maliwa was saying, which has also had to be tough in a different way, and trying to balance all those things. It's hard enough when in a normal situation, but in this situation, when the pressures are higher, the meeting fatigue is higher, the pressures of getting everything done, we really need to ensure that we try and create space for ourselves in that balance. So what are the enablers of our success? I think first and foremost is our family support. We don't necessarily, men in leadership positions, they say, okay, you just go, and whatever happens at home, it happens at home. Of course, there are involved men. Personally, my husband's quite supportive, but there are still things that when you are a family alone, isolated, you don't have extended family, that you need that support. So family support gives you inspiration. They push you. They influence you to go forward. They put structures in to enable you. So if you have that you're lucky to have extended family, they can enable the childcare. They can enable you to work the long nights and cook dinners if your husband doesn't cook, that kind of thing. So that's really, really important. Good education, as Tendai was saying, without that, we really can't move forward, because the level of education that you have is really very important. Oops, I'm running out of time. Okay, a secure environment. What kind of environment do we have? Do we have an environment that recognizes our skill sets, recognizes our abilities? Is there a way to build trust within the society, within the organization? Are there mechanisms to enhance our self-confidence and give us those opportunities to achieve the things that we need to? The factors that build security is we need to change male attitudes. We need to show certain men who of certain eras that haven't quite gotten the picture yet that we are leaders. We are leaders at home, we are leaders in the workplace, and we need to move forward with that and really sensitize them. And they need to reflect as well as to their attitudes and what they're giving out. Make sure that not only the legal measures are there, but there's implementation of those laws in order to enable. And a suitable education system for women. An education system that allows women and girls to move forward in science and encourages it, as opposed to making it feel like it's a special or a different sort of thing. And then how do we get there? We have to ensure that we recruit strong women such as we have in our university and in this group here, and keep them involved in moving forward. Training opportunities. We have different educational backgrounds, we have different contexts. We need these opportunities to help us move forward, and those opportunities need to be equitably distributed. We need to have good access to those opportunities in order to grow. Effective career mapping, I think it's something that people kind of forget about, is that when in our academic situation comes in, what are the different roles they can play? What are the different paths? Not everyone wants to be the uber researcher, but some people do. Some people want to move into management, some of us fall into it. But we need to be able to help young people in the pipeline to map out their career, and look at the different opportunities they can take up to move forward, as well as the different stages that, if depending on the path that they want to be in. Wellness facilities, making sure that we get mental and physical wellness, and then provisions for family support. So if you are a small family or a single parent, what kind of societal support is there for you and your family and for your child and for your childcare when you have young children? How do we make that an enabling situation, and make sure that there are policy changes and advocate for the implementation of those policies. So in an ever-changing world where the rate of change is accelerating, we have to work differently anyway with the different changes. Continuous learning is going to be critical for our development, both in the research and management and leading, and we need to create enabling structures for that. And on top of that, we have COVID and being at home, and we need to take care of ourselves and make sure that we lead by example in that regard as well. So thank you. Sorry I went over time. Bye.
Thank you so much, Denise. I really enjoyed the presentation, and it also echoed some of the sentiments and provided some good background. But I also enjoyed the sort of operationalization you were hinting at the end in your last slides. It is with great pleasure now that I'm going to ask Professor Kola Phumla to speak. Also, we haven't gotten to know one another in the past, and I'm hoping that this will provide a platform for inclusion and discussions going forward. I do believe that Phumla, you are online, so if you can go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. It's still morning. The Zoom meetings time can be quite mobile. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I am going to, and I'm looking forward to, as we move out of lockdown and COVID, to getting to meet many of the colleagues whose names have become very familiar, but who I haven't met in person. So I'm looking forward to a time where we can have an old-fashioned interactions again. But we are under time pressure, so let me get started. In August every year, we are invited to think about women's contributions in South Africa. It's Women's Month. It's an opportunity to reflect and to think about women's lives, to think about women's contributions, to think about how far women have to go, to think about the world and the changes that women have affected in our society, in our profession, in institutions. It is also a time to reflect on the cultures that surround us. And I'm very happy to be speaking after the specific speakers that I'm speaking after, because those have covered so much in terms of enabling what I want to reflect on today. It's a time to reflect on the cultures that surround us as a university and beyond as a society. And the question I'd like to ask myself and of us colleagues, especially as university-located colleagues, is whether it is enough to keep preparing women for a society we want to build, or do we need to think about gender differently? The colleagues who have spoken before me have excellently outlined some of what we know about women and the worlds of work, things that prevent and enable women's progress. And in many respects, then, what they've spoken about illuminates gender power in the academy and outside the academy. It is an articulate narrative, an analysis of continuities and disruptions, what works, what doesn't work, which allows us to think about processes and phenomenon rather than frozen categories. Some colleagues have talked in ways that amplify movement and rights, as well as safety. I want to talk specifically about cultures of safety or unsafety, cultures of safety and precarity or unsafety. And I want to do this through not a slide presentation, but through three stories. The story of COVID. If the COVID-19 global pandemic has amplified aspects of societies, whether we think about societies as geopolitical entities, so countries, or whether we think about societies as institutions like academia, universities, what are revealed are specific areas of vulnerability that teach us something that we perhaps already knew, but also perhaps amplify specific areas of vulnerability and precarity at universities. When we think about universities and power, we often think about the processes and the policies we need to think about, we need to create, we need to put in place. I want to think this morning, along with you colleagues, about the ways in which universities are implicated in the creation of certain kinds of gender cultures. We know, for example, that patriarchy does not respect national boundaries or institutional boundaries, that it is unabashedly promiscuous in its influences and what it attaches to itself to. It takes whatever it needs from wherever it needs in order to survive. And yes, of course, it can often use women's strategies of advancement, of empowerment against us. In early June, I was asked by Mehita Ikani, Associate Professor of Media Studies at Wits, to join a panel of feminists to reflect on the intersections of feminist media research and the COVID-19 pandemic. That panel was titled Domestics, Publics, and Pandemics, Feminist Media Studies in the Here and Now. I was delighted to be in conversation with colleagues who were sitting in very different parts of the world. Shani Ogad, who sat in London, Beatrice Polivanov in Rio de Janeiro, Shilpa Patke in Mumbai, and Xuan Liu in Beijing. The conversation was for a panel on an international media studies conference. And I will not summarize here what was a rich and wide-ranging discussions. But let me quickly share a story shared by one of those colleagues that we then discussed and illuminated something about the intersections of the pandemic and our society and pre-existing aspects of our societies in ways that are surprising or troubling or illuminating. And I want to juxtapose this story. So I'll tell a story from China shared by my colleague, Professor Xuan Liu in Beijing, along with perhaps a familiar story for those of us sitting in South Africa. And I want to juxtapose these two because they don't seem to be about the same thing. They're both gendered in interesting ways that may show us something about the articulations of gender power and sometimes safety and maybe violence. Xuan Liu told us on that panel that lifting the lockdown had had specific gendered manifestations in China, some predictable, but one of the more surprising manifestations had been the appearance of queues of men and women outside the Chinese equivalent of the Home Affairs Office. Immediately upon the complete lifting of the lockdown, queues of men and women applying for divorces. Now, something about the particular living arrangements in that society were illuminated in the aftermath of a lockdown that had been enforced, that had been put in place to ensure safety. Let me move on quickly to the second narrative, when South Africa transitioned from lockdown 5 to lockdown level 5 to level 4, one of the most striking aspects reported on in our media, especially in our television media, was the almost daily appearances of dead women's bodies dumped along the roads in various parts of South Africa's urban cities. We were regularly finding in those first few days, in the first 2 weeks of lockdown level 4, bodies of women dumped in the aftermath, seemingly killed during the lockdown. Now, why do these two make any sense together? The lockdown were implemented in China, in Brazil, in South Africa, in India, in various places in the world, where lockdowns were rationalized through a language of safety. Safety from an ominous global pandemic that insisted that we needed to retreat into a space that is safe. Staying at home, countries had renewed senses of how to keep people safe. The lockdown pushed people into the home, the domestic space. A seemingly straightforward, simple decision. Or at least if we pay attention to the speeches by politicians, by presidents, by ministers of police, this decision to push as many of the populace back into the domestic space was framed as a seemingly straightforward, simple decision. But safety from public interaction in order to contain the spread of the disease or to curb it, although it seems to make sense if we're thinking about the virus and death from the virus or the spread of the virus, also required a complete sidestepping of what else we know about the unsafety of the home. And so we often speak about home spaces, the domestic spaces, as spaces of retreat, even in the face of overwhelming research from across the world by now. The second half of the 20th century certainly has unearthed the domestic space as the family space, the domestic space, as not the space of safety that we previously thought it was, but rather a space of embattlement. And this recognition exists not only in social science and legal and humanities research, but this is research and this is a recognition that we have seen also translate into resolutions taken at UN women's conferences, as we've watched the language of those conferences shift quite significantly from the first ones in the mid-70s to the ones in the 90s. So this increasing recognition that to take for granted that the family space or the domestic space is an overwhelmingly safe space is in fact dangerous for women. That in fact we need to think about the domestic space. We need to think about retreating to spaces of family in a more complicating way. That the home is not automatically a safe space for women. That it is a place of embattlement for many women. And yet, even in the space of in the face of this, even in countries that otherwise have policies and legislation that recognize how violent many homes are, that recognize in a society like ours also not only how violent homes often are, but also their unequal division of labor in the home, and therefore increased burden on predominantly women in the home as we retreat and as we privatize functions and work that would occur otherwise outside. Nonetheless, we proceeded with the performance of the home as safe, or as ensuring safety from the disease and ensuring safety from all other aspects of danger. Without then, and no sense in the public domain of how the safety is complicated and gendered in specific ways. So this is important for us to think about the way we work with danger. It's important to think about gender power as attentive to the kinds of expressions of gender power as well. And when we think about gender power, of course, we need to think not just about women and men, but how women and men are made in our societies, in our legal pronouncements, in our representation in the media, but also, of course, in the work we do as universities. As researchers, we spend enormous amounts of time paying attention to why patriarchy is harmful. And we spend considerable amount of time in certain kinds of disciplines, teaching in ways that enable our students to be able to break through glass ceilings, to critique patriarchal oppression, to legislate in ways that are interesting, to litigate, to teach, and so on, to be subjects that are questioning of patriarchal logic. And we do so in the classroom. It seems to me, though, that often we do not pay attention to the many ways in which, while we continue to teach in the classrooms this work, while we continue to produce some of this work, we also, as institutions, as universities, are deeply implicated in the recreation and the normalization of patriarchal logic, of ways of thinking about gender that cause precisely the problems that we research against. And so it seems to me that August offers us an opportunity then to not only, and perhaps in August under COVID, offers us an opportunity to think about gender not only as women, but also not only in the places that we usually do, that we perhaps there's a possibility, perhaps the gift of COVID, if indeed we can speak about a pandemic as having any gift at all, is the possibilities it offers us to think about how we may create institutional cultures differently. Not just as Nelson Mandela, but as the university. What is a university, and especially what is a university that socializes students and staff against patriarchal violence look like? Not just in the classroom, but in the social spaces, in the resident spaces, and so on. And what is the way in which those of us who are inhabitants of the university, those of us who are invested in the knowledge project, in teaching against subjection, in rethinking the ways in which the university, not just our university, but the place of the university, any university, in undoing this work. And this is particularly urgent for those of us in the university, because we know that rape culture, that patriarchal violence is endemic in universities globally. That it is a troublesome but enduring aspect of university culture. And so I'm interested today and beyond in thinking about some of the ways in which we can render cultures of violence unsafe, rather than certain groups of people on our campuses unsafe. How do we socialize in our universities in ways that create cultures that are inhospitable to forms of violence and rendering others safety, rather than, and in line with some of the ways in which we teach against violence and research against violence, rather than, in fact, replicating some of the patterns and the hierarchies of violence we see reflected in everywhere in the society against us. And finally, part of this motivation is because it seems to me increasingly dissatisfactory that as academics, as researchers, we work so hard to try and change the world. And yet universities, in many ways, their university, so with exceptions of certain specific universities that do this work consciously, we spend so little time interrogating the ways in which the institutionality, in the way in which the regimes through which universities are constituted, how we do the normal business of academia, is in fact implicated in, directly implicated in creating unsafety, the very unsafety we're working against. And so it seems then the invitation has to be, as part of what we do in August, as part of what we do all year, to think about what it means to take seriously our claims that we make repeatedly, that gender matters, that women matters, that different genders matter on campus, and how we make and unmake gender matters.
Thank you so much, Pumla. And I found really inspiring is the challenges you've thrown out to rethink and reimagine some of the ways that we even speak about gender, and how we even address some of the perceived, or even the way we actually contextualize or define some of the issues that gender has to identify with as issues. And I think also throwing down the gauntlet that as an institution, we need to rethink how the institution functions and how it could possibly be playing a very clear role in perpetuating patriarchal norms. So thank you very much for that, Pumla. That was really interesting. And I'm sure it's going to add to our debate and our discussions and reflections later on. Thank you very much for that. All right, it is my pleasure now to introduce Lorianne. Lorianne is going to give us another perspective around ecological grief. Lorianne plays a seminal role in advocacy for environment and environmental rights, and therefore I'm really pleased to have her present to us today. Thanks, Lorianne.
Thank you so much, Benny. And let me just share my screen quickly. Thank you also very much. Is it working? Yeah. To you, Benny, and to the organizing committee for inviting me to speak to you today, and to give me the opportunity to actually talk about something which I found very important and is very close to me. And I was supposed to present it. I've never talked about it before, so I'm quite excited to talk to you about it this morning. And I was supposed to present that as a poster at SAMS last month with Cloverly Lawrence, actually, as a co-author. We've been working on that. But actually, it's perhaps more appropriate this morning because I think those beautiful talks this morning, thank you so much for the speakers. It was really blown me away. But I think it's also showed how much we women are generally more in touch with our emotions than men. And we heard that from that beautiful talk from Dr. Mawila, acknowledging our vulnerability and actually taking strength from that. And I don't think that's really a biological thing, that we women are different from men on that level. I think it's more, that's my personal idea, but it's more accepted by society that we women are emotional beings. So it's more accepted that we can express those emotions. And because of that, then we can also support each other, other women, but also anyone into experiencing grief, but also just supporting people expressing their emotion. So perhaps some of you haven't heard about the word ecological grief before. It's also called ecological anxiety. But many of us, and I'm sure most of you, have experienced it at some point, at some degrees, and perhaps even at quite strong degree, without necessarily realizing what it was. And like any forms of grief, the first step to get out of it and take strength from it is to realizing it and acknowledging it. So the first person to describe the emotional toll of ecological loss, which is the ecological grief, was Aldo Leopold, who was a biologist and a writer, who wrote back in the 50s that one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. And that was much before we've read about climate change and we affected the environment as much as we can feel it nowadays. So really, we biologists and scientists working during the Holocene extension, during the sixth mass extension, we observing firsthand the greatest and most rapid environmental change than ever previously witnessed before by humans. And in the meantime, we have the most profound knowledge of it. So, oops, sorry about that. So many of us biologists have seen in our career our own study species dwindling or ecosystems being destroyed. And we don't have, so we don't quite have the tool to face that. So just to draw on my own experience, I've been working for the past 15 years on, when I started my PhD in 2004, on Marjas Island on Cape Ganness on the west coast, and you can see the top picture, how the colony was looking like in 2003, and it doesn't look like the same perspective, but it actually is. If you look at those nests here of crown cormorants have been built up over time, and that's basically those ones. So you can see how much the colony totally shrinked in 15 years. And I've been working on that colony every year, and every year I've seen it shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and so much so that in 2018, after 15 years, I couldn't work on the birds anymore because there was just not enough. And like any environmental catastrophe, it's above a certain or below a certain threshold. It's a combination of factors that make the colony below a certain threshold, and then we couldn't work anymore. So we had avian influenza, we had high predation, no food, so I couldn't work, which was really a shock. And then I sat next to that colony crying. 6 months later, I have to work on African penguins, on which I've been working for the past 12 years on St. Croix Island here in the Bay. It's the world's largest African penguin colony. And same thing happened. There was just no birds to work on. So within 6 months, I couldn't work on those two species I've been working for the past 12 years. And that was really affecting me deeply. And I think what put the nail in the coffin was that same year, last year in 2019, in April, so Notre Dame burned, and so that was close to home. It's a beautiful building. I mean, it's Paris, you know, a symbol of so long human history. And I'm sure you heard that within a few weeks, €1 billion got raised to fix Notre Dame. So yes, Notre Dame is beautiful. It's a symbol of history, but it's a human building. In the same time, the Amazon was burning and no one was doing anything. Well, these very rich people were not putting €1 billion to fix the Amazon. So that really affected me emotionally, and I started talking about it to colleagues, and it's actually Dr. Alistair Potts from Botany that told me, but you're suffering from ecological grief. And realizing that, put a word on that grief I was feeling, allowed me to research on it, to acknowledge it, to research on that, to learn on that, and about that, and to see ways forward, to get out of it, basically. But I'm obviously not the only one. I think in 2019, because of all, there was a lot more information of climate change in the press, a lot more demonstration, thanks to Greta Thunberg. The awareness of climate change was a lot more present in the press. So many people have been suffering without realizing of ecological grief, anxiety, and realizing, oh, but the house is on fire, society is going to collapse, and we're not doing enough things about that. So that leads us to a sense of isolation, of sadness. And so the definition of ecological grief is a recently recognized form of depression caused by environmental destruction or climate change. So like any of other griefs, it will be associated with anxiety or shame or anger. Distress can appear as insomnia or, you know, eating disorder or whatever. So, but the slight difference with another form of grief is the fact that unlike someone we lose over time, we will get over the grief. We know that, but with climate change, there is no end. We will not get better. So sometimes seeing the catastrophe coming, the inaction of the government, the ignorance of people can make us as biologists or as scientists doubt the usefulness of our very jobs. So we may even wonder, why am I bothering writing a few papers about things that won't change? So it can be very debilitating because it just makes us very powerless and robbing us from our will to fight, to engage, and to do things. So sorry, what I wanted to say. So it can be very debilitating, basically, and it's specifically more important for us. I mean, it's paradoxical for us scientists because we're supposed to be objective now, and you can't really talk about it. We're often not allowed to express it. I was talking to a journalist earlier in the year about the penguins, and then he asked me what I was working on, and I said, well, I'm actually working on ecological grief. And he said, do you realize that we, the public, would rather see you scientists working on solutions rather than on your own grief? I thought, yeah, but I also need to sort my own grief to be able to work on solutions. So it was quite interesting to see we're not allowed to express it, because then we come across as too sensitive or weak, and that's the role of activists, to be emotional, and they can go and do that, but we must be very rational. But then we suppress those emotions, and that can lead to depressions and even burnout or leaving the profession. So it's been that awareness must be risen, really. And recently, December last year, this PhD student wrote in Science a beautiful little note about that fact that they work on a Great Barrier Reef, so very exposed to climate change and seeing the change all the time. And they were saying, we have no support to face the trauma that our job is actually exposing us to. Unlike the military, unlike the medical professions that have support, like Dr. Shah was saying, we need some wellness facilities as scientists to take care of our trauma, to acknowledge it, so we can actually bounce back from it and be stronger and fun and function as scientists. So the conclusion of his article was saying scientists must be allowed to cry to actually be able to function and do our job properly. So he was advocating for support groups, and that's when I think women are an important role, because they're often supporting each other more than their counterparts. And so we should be able to support each other, to be allowed to grieve and emerge stronger from those traumatic experiences. So I think we should be reminded that the words of Parks and Bridgerton, so they're saying that grief can be regarded as an illness, but it's also a strength. Just like a broken bone is sometimes stronger than a normal bone. Grief can bring strength, as the experience of grieving can bring maturity. So the pain of grief is just as much as part of life as the joy of love. And it is perhaps the price we pay for love. And I think the most important paper that I would really encourage you to read if you are interested in the topic, it's the person that went more in depth in that was Jem Bendel. So he talked about we must acknowledge ecological grief, and we must move on and face reality. And that's what he called a deep adaptation to face a climate tragedy. So he goes through why we're in denial first, and that's mostly because our denial of death in our Western culture, we don't talk about our own death, maybe ours, but also the death of our society. So he's facing the fact that climate change is bringing a social collapse, and that what is very bring the grief. And he's talking about how to face it. So once we have taken the denial away and we can face the new normal, he used the 3 R's, just like in So So basically, we once we stop, we shed the denial. We can shed the wrong hopes. Sometimes a hope for something that cannot happen is not helpful. So we can shed that, and there's space for new creativity. And we can face a post-sustainability framework, which I think is very interesting. So we should forget about the idea of sustainability, but work towards a post-sustainability framework. And that involves resilience. So resilience being surviving, keeping the values that are important to us. So that bring the question of what values do we want to keep in the new normal. It also brings relinquishment. So with wondering what value we want to keep, we also must think about the one we want to shed. So that would mean some assets, possibly too close to the coast. We're talking about climate change, changing our way of traveling, etc., our way of functioning, and the restoration. So the third R would be restoration, which is going back to attributes and approaches that we lost with our more recent society, more individualist and consumerist. So restoring the habit of being strong in a community, you know, having a sustainable diet, and restoring ecosystem services, etc. So yes, it was a very deep paper, very interesting, and moving forward in a positive way. So there's a few other, if you're interested in the subject, a few very good books about that really helping to move forward. But eventually, and I'll end up on that, it's the idea that we must combine mitigation, adaptation, and joy in where we're going forward. So we must mitigate, so decrease the idea is to decrease our carbon footprint. Also by doing that, we do feel that we participate, we are doing something, while reconnecting with nature brings joy as well. But what is very important, I think the message I want to bring here, is to normalize the conversation about ecological grief among like-minded people that often feel isolated. And that can be taken in different forms of expression. It can be through art or blog or support groups, and through various platforms. And also adapting, being engaging, and being active locally, politically. And for that, what's important is to focus on the positive stories, because we need to hear them. That's the message I wanted to give you today. And if you are interested, if you do realize that you may be affected by ecological grief, there are quite a few support groups existing, so I'll just put them there for your information. But otherwise, there's a very interesting website there. So thanks again, Bernie, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Marian. That was quite insightful and thoughtful and personal. And I think it's brave to bring these conversations to the table that are really important, because I do believe in giving it a name and being able to deal with it is very important. And I even see this in some of our students who are suffering but don't know why, and feel like they want to do more, but under the norms of what scientists should be, you know, these you know, unbiased critical thinkers that aren't going to have feelings. And we do instill that still. We perpetuate that a lot in what is the scientific method. And I think it's very important to you know, address this as we move forward. Very much, Lorianne. If you can unshare your screen, I'm going to hand over to our last speaker. And I'd like to invite Nikki James to present to us now. And thank her very much. I've also known Nikki for a while, and I've seen the little girls grow from little babies to being bigger. And we're looking forward to your insights and thoughts, Nikki.
Thanks so much, Bernie and Lisa, for the opportunity to give this talk. I'm just going to try and share my screen quick. Okay. So I was asked to talk on equality at home and in the workplace, and it completely stumped me. So I changed it to combining the challenges of motherhood and research during the coronavirus pandemic, and how that's affected gender equality. Sorry. So just to give some background, I'm a senior scientist at the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity, which is an NRF facility. I focus on coastal and estuarine fish ecology, particularly the relationship between fish and their habitat, as well as climate change. I started out in Durban, where I did my master's degree at the Oceanographic Research Institute in the early 2000s, and then I moved to the Eastern Cape in 2007. Sorry, I'm a bit behind here. I started out doing a postdoc at SAIB, and then I got my job at SAIB in 2009, and I had my first child in 2011, and I have two kids, Kelsey, who's 6 years old, and Cara, who's 9. And I found that having children definitely changes the way you operate as a scientist in a job which tends to be modeled worldwide on male scientists who are often away in the field. They're at conferences and meetings, and then in the evening they're able to devote their time to writing papers, while their wives are often at home and bear the brunt of child rearing. In fact, in my own organization, I found that the performance metrics for scientists are written by a male with such an individual in mind. So you actually get more points awarded for the longer you are away from home on a field trip, and no points for being in the lab and in the office. So within the system, having kids is quite an adjustment. You think you're going to be fine to go away on long field trips and overseas conferences, but it's not that easy in reality. I can remember going away for a 2-night trip and having my 3-year-old sobbing inconsolably and running after me in the driveway as I tried to leave for the airport, and I was late for my flight. And it's hard because you're now the center of somebody else's world apart from your own. Luckily, I found as a scientist, we do have some flexibility in the work we take on and the projects that we apply for. So I started out in Grahamstown, and I've moved to PE about 4 years ago, and I found that I've tried to work locally as much as possible. And since moving to PE, this has been much easier, with almost all my fieldwork now based in Algoa Bay. I've also tried to get as much done as I can in the office so that I separate my time, and then I spend as much time in the evenings and weekends with my family as I can. But COVID has changed all of this. It's made combining parenthood and science that much harder, especially with the schools being closed. So my nanny is, my kid's nanny is diabetic, and I haven't had help with childcare or housework for the last 5 months. So in a given day, I try to sit at my computer and concentrate, which I find is nearly impossible with constant interruptions. So you get, I then have to get through homeschooling with both my kids. So the schools send an hour to 2 hours worth of work for the kids to do each day. And my kids at the moment are too young to do this by themselves. So they need to use my or my husband's computers. My youngest is in grade R, so she obviously can't read or write. So I have to go through this work with her. And then my kids want somebody to play with them. So I spend time playing with my kids. You've got to fit housework into this, making sure everybody's fed, going to the shops. So I found that I'm able to work if my kids are glued to a computer screen. But then you have that mommy guilt, so you feel bad because up to now I've tried to avoid my kids spending too much time in front of a computer screen or a tablet or the TV. I am lucky in that my bosses are understanding of the challenges of working from home and parenting, but that being said, they are all male. I found that I can go through students' chapters, but I can't write up my own papers. I can't concentrate for long enough periods of time to read and to write constructively. I am, however, lucky in that I'm at a stage in my career where I have a pipeline of students who are publishing, so COVID is not having as big an impact on my productivity as I would imagine it's having on other early career scientist moms. So to approach this talk, I spoke to my fellow scientist moms, and I asked them what impact COVID was having on their research career at the moment. So the first person I spoke to was Dr. Laura Atkinson. She's a scientist in Cape Town, and she's mom to a 6-year-old boy. She said, "It's funny how the children always seem to shout mommy so much more than daddy. I wonder why that is." But yes, productivity levels are definitely strained, and I have even managed to get my nanny back most days. But we've just got to keep trying to do the best we can and try not to be too hard on ourselves. Truthfully, I would choose to have secure, stable, and well-balanced children rather than a few more papers to my name. I think I accepted that fact long ago, but it still does not make it still makes it hard to swallow when the men just seem to so much more able to not hear the noise or the chaos that's going on around them and plow on ahead, focused on furthering their careers. I then spoke to Dr. Taryn Murray, who's a SciAB early career scientist, and she's mom to a baby girl, Becky, who's 6 months old, and Mikey, who's 2 years old. She said she's found this time to be extremely frustrating. There's so many feelings that she found it hard to put them into words. She said, I want to work, I enjoy working, I want to further develop my skills as a scientist, I want to work on papers to increase my number of outputs, all things important as an early career scientist. But when you have 2 small children under 3 and limited help, she's got her mom-in-law, this is just entirely unachievable. It might be better if I had a nanny though. I found I have to work at night, which I feel is also dampening my relationship with Dale, who's her husband. We are hardly communicating as it is, and our 2 ships passing in the night at the moment. It's just kids and work, and I feel like we hardly ever get to just sit and chat, and when we do, it's in a whisper because the baby is sleeping. I also get so incredibly mad with him sometimes because he can just up and leave and say he's going to work, and it's completely fine. I could never even dream of doing that, and the injustice of me being expected to just stay here and look after the kids is infuriating. So in short, yes, it has affected her. I know I should be appreciating the time I have with my kids. I mean, when else will this happen again through the mommy guilt? But sometimes I just want to do something for me, and that is sometimes work. And then the last person I spoke to was Dr. Amber Childs. She's a senior lecturer at Rhodes University and mom to Riley, who's 3 years old, and Josh, who's 5 years old. She said, I'm in the same department as my husband, who's a professor in our department, and we have had considerable help from my mom, yet we're still struggling to balance work and kids. I feel permanently guilty for telling the kids that I always have to work on the computer, in Zoom meetings, or just hanging the washing. Younger kids seem so much more demanding than older kids, and although we share the parent and workload, calling for mom definitely seems to be the first port of call during the day and every night and early morning. I suppose it's just natural, and to be honest, I wouldn't want it any other way. One thing I can say is that the divide between scientists with kids, especially younger kids, and those without kids during COVID is massive. I am fully aware that COVID has brought anxiety and uncertainty and hence lack of productivity to many without children. But for those that can cope, I think COVID has produced an incredible opportunity for infinite levels of productivity. I've also noticed from a university perspective, a divide between scientists who have large lecture loads and course coordination responsibilities versus those who have none, because make no mistake, teaching remotely is much more time consuming than face-to-face. These divides, however, do not bother me too much. I chose to have kids knowing it would be hard to juggle parenting and work. So I don't normally engage in the female inequality debate, which may be because I have a supportive husband and have never felt marginalized in the workplace, but I'm fully aware that it exists for many female scientists, and reviewing performance evaluations and equality in the workplace is extremely important. So then I had a look at some of the recent literature that's come out about working moms during COVID. And this paper, which was in Nature Communications, says it's like we're going back 30 years, how the coronavirus is gutting diversity in science. So this paper found that the pandemic has exposed and exacerbated gender disparities in academia. They found that women often take on an inequitable number of non-research tasks at home and at work, and most male academics are focused on writing papers during the pandemic, whereas females are loaded with online teaching and communal tasks. Then in this paper in Science, which looked at the impact of COVID-19 on academic mothers, they found that mothers of young children who are at home from school are facing challenges, and that's more so than academic fathers. So instead of writing papers, they're more likely homeschooling children and doing housework. This is more challenging for early career scientists, which may increase the distance between them and their male peers, especially if they are childless. So they also said that motherhood has already played a major role in gender inequality in science, which is then exacerbated by COVID. So I had a look at this paper, which was done in the early 2000s, so before the pandemic, and they looked at when scientists choose motherhood. So they attributed the underrepresentation of females in mathematical-based STEM fields for a desire for children and family life. So they looked at a number of factors. This is based on the American university system. And they said that men often have stay-at-home spouses or spouses in flexible careers who bear and raise children while the men are free to focus on their academic work. Whereas women professors who want to bear children can never achieve the same distance from child-rearing, and male stay-at-home partners devoted to childcare are very rare. Once children or even plans to have children exist, women become far more likely to move out of research, the research professor pipeline, whereas women with no plans for children show decision-making comparable to men, so they exhibit about the same likelihood of opting out of research professor careers. This is just illustrated here. So at the top, they show men without, with or without children, and women without children follow a very similar career path in the American university system, whereas women with children or plans to have children often opt out of the university research path, or their path to professorship is delayed. And then the last article I looked at is one that came out in the conversation at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was written by a female professor at the University of Toronto. And she found that even if women split childcare duties evenly with a supportive partner, they are still competing with many men who do much less at home. So she found that the number of male preprint authors in science is growing faster than the number of female preprint authors. So basically the men are publishing far more during the pandemic than females, and women are not advancing their research as fast as men. And she commented that men embrace gender equality, but they still don't vacuum. So her conclusions were that for now, I will just try my best to climb back up on that ball and see how much I can juggle. I will remember to count my many blessings, because a few less papers is nothing compared to the lives and livelihoods lost because of COVID-19. But a part of me will always wonder what discoveries women scientists might have made were it not for this pandemic and the setback it is causing to the hard-won progress of women in STEM fields. So in conclusion, I would say, don't be too hard on yourself. What I try to do is allocate tasks to each day, and I take a day-by-day approach rather than stressing about how many hours I've managed to work in a day. And this parting words from Amber is: communicate with your husband, highlight your frustrations, and suggest ways to level the playing field to ultimately strengthen the relationship between the two of you and your families. She says that males and females operate differently, significantly so. So be clear in your discussions with your husband, because no level of hinting will be effective. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for that. In the chat, there were some requests for the slides or some of the presentations. We have recorded it, and we will make this session, all these sessions, available on our website for everyone to go back to, and for those who were unable to attend to also have a chance to listen to the presentations. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. And the floor is open now for some discussion and to share some ideas with one another, to offer some support, also to take up some of the challenges that some of the speakers have added to the mix this morning. The floor is open. Hannah, if you can just help me see who's put their hands up or not, but the floor is open for any conversation or comments or discussion. Thanks, Hannah.
Well, I can start. I just felt that the Nikki's talk now resonated quite strongly with myself as a young scientist and deciding how to move forward with my family life. married for nearly 4 years now, and we want to start a family. But the thing is, do I do my PhD beforehand? What will happen if I have children? Like, it's always that constant thought in the back of my mind, like, will I be able to juggle it? And it's quite inspiring to see people like Nikki and Laura and all these women in science that are able to juggle it, but it's not easy. So I really appreciate and admire you all that are able to get through this, especially now with this lockdown, and being able to manage being a mother, trying to teach your children as well, and then trying to work. It's really been rough. I really appreciate and admire you all.
Thank you so much for that, Hannah. I was also just wondering if there are no hands that are coming up to ask, but in terms of making that decision of the careers that are going forward, and a question with regards to funding students, and now the new funding formula, particularly through the National Research Foundation, there is an age gap and an age limit to when you can go on to your next career and get funding. And you may end up saying, I'm going to put off having my family a little bit later, or I'm going to have my family and then come to studies later. But then you are excluded from receiving funds because now you're too old. So ageism creeps in. So if anyone has thought about that, I've seen it with one of my students who had children first, and now wants to go and do a PhD and is unable to because she's now over the age to receive the funding from next year. Any other thoughts, Jessica?
Sorry, I couldn't find my hand to put it up.
No, that's fine. Find any way to call attention.
I have a question specifically for the people who work with NRF, and also the prof who talked about how institutions need to change, because some of the professors who became professors before us wouldn't qualify today on the criteria that we are being judged on to become professors. So I just wanted to know to what extent should the institution start considering the unpaid labor of women scientists, and the fact that the workload is unequal, but you're still supposed to have the same number of publications as your male counterpart. But then also from the NRF perspective, just the categorization also, like you were talking about funding. Some people are early starters, some people are late starters. When are they going to relook some of those boxes that they are putting people in? If that's something that maybe the panel can just, or anyone who wants to comment on that can comment on that.
Thanks, Jessica. No one seems to want to comment. Kwesi, you've got your hand up.
Kwesi's got her hand up.
Yeah. Kwesi, over to you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Hello, it's very good to see everybody. I'm not sure about my internet connection, that's why my video's been off, but let's try. So if I can just speak to the question around the NRF. Obviously, I do not work for the NRF, but I have previously worked for the NRF, and I do not presume to speak on their behalf. However, I think one of the things that we don't capitalize on enough as academics, particularly at our institution, is the opportunity to actually serve on the NRF panels. So a lot of the work that the NRF does before funding can be allocated is actually done by peers. So almost all of the applications that get sent through to the NRF, be it a research grant, a travel grant, to start a new research program, all of them are adjudicated on by a panel of peers. So it's actually fellow academics that make the decisions on what constitutes productivity within a particular area or discipline. And so when we participate in the panels, then we are at the table where the decisions are being made. So that would be my input there. So it's really, I often hear people saying the NRF does this, the NRF does that. Actually, the South African academics do the stuff. I hope that makes sense.
It does, Kwezi, thank you. Anyone else would like to add anything or a different question or comment on any of the presentations?
Hi, Bernie. I can't find my hand thing.
No worries.
Oh, no, there it is. It's on the, it's a different screen. Okay, anyway, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, I'd like to also just say that we have brought up the age limit, especially for women with NRF, and had that discussion. They do have reasons around why they are discriminatory. You can see where I lie. However, there are different ways that we can probably help. It's a little bit easier if you're an employed academic than if you're coming in, because there are funding instruments like the Tutuka grant and the Black Academic grants, but academic advancement programs. But yes, we have raised that. I think it's still always worth a continual discussion. But they do have their research and their prioritization. So I think that people shouldn't be too discouraged, but we need, we do need to keep that dialogue with NRF in order to make them realize that people do have different paths, and it is important to support those who did choose to have a family first and come back. But yeah, I mean, they have some reasons, but and they are valid ones in terms of the cash-strapped nature of the economy in the country at the moment.
Thank you. Denise, yes, and I agree, we need to keep the conversations going. Kwezi, your mic is still off. I don't know if you want to say anything else.
No, Benny, thanks.
Oh, good. Anyone else have anything further to say? Any comments?
See, Kalu Kim has their mic unmuted as well. Do you want to say anything? Oh, she's muted. Never mind. I never know whether to mute you or not.
I'm wanting to address the previous comment, especially having worked in the NRF. And I think if I look at Kwezi there, and I look at Thandi, we've worked in the NRF, and we've been the voices in the NRF of the women on the other side. So allow me to address this issue as someone who was also responsible for the policies in the NRF as an executive then. And I want to address this without sounding as though I am correcting, but I am correcting actually, because there is need for us to do that. There is a policy in the NRF that was developed, and Kwezi will tell you, she was on my team when we did this, a policy for transformation in the NRF that was done in 2016. That policy provides compelling reasons, and we did that based on research, for how we support non-white students, how we support the marginalized scientists, women included, and researchers, as well as the principles that we are going to prioritize as the NRF, that we were going to prioritize as the NRF for driving policy change and the execution of an overhaul of the NRF funding instruments, specifically to address the needs of women researchers. And so I have to correct this impression that Dr. Shael says. If you look at the current NRF website, you will find that a lot of the instruments that the NRF used to have been revised. You will also find that in particular to women researchers, the issue of age is addressed with the postgraduate researchers, specifically as it pertains to the women who are upcoming in those areas of research where we don't have women being prominently represented. And there is a change that has been introduced to the NRF that specifically looks at how NRF funding instruments are actually addressing the issue of equity of access. And that says, rather than fund too many in a space where resources are scarce, why don't you fund women and researchers for an extended period so that you can provide adequate support that covers women who choose to have families, who choose to take a career break, so that when they return, if they are scientists working in the labs, they have the kind of support that enables them to resume their careers without being left out. Where I believe the conversations need to happen is in ensuring that those researchers who are currently in the system are becoming productive. And what policies on the university side need to be put in place to support women to be productive researchers, to compete, and to have mentorship programs that are based on networks of mentors. That's where the conversation about the support for women researchers or non-white researchers needs to go. We also need to confront the reality that the NRF's primary reasons for not supporting researchers who are women in the way that it used to be has a lot to do with the prominence of female white researchers, whom in the categories of women researchers are more privileged than non-white researchers. That's a reality that the NRF and other funders in this country have to face. Go to the ARC, go to the MRC, you will find that this remains a primary challenge. So how do we support those female researchers who have not had a privilege by changing the policies in such a way that age is not an item that we use to discriminate, but one that we use to reason and sustain the funding of women of color in the academy and giving them a fair chance. When we look at the white females who have cumulative advantage, even in terms of the resources of the knowledge enterprise. So I hope that assists, and I would encourage Dr. Shayel to actually be in touch with Dr. Romila Maharaj, because I know too well that this is something that she is really, really fighting for, and is determined to make sure that women researchers are addressed in their fullness as well as recognizing their capacity. Thank you, colleagues, for the opportunity to comment. I really do think that we need to set the record straight on those issues.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, I think it's important that we also understand from different perspectives. There is also not a one-size-fits-all solution, and it's like a system that needs to be tackled from different angles. And I think that's what's also being highlighted, is the importance of communication and understanding the complexity of what is being addressed. So thank you very much for that and for the input. Is there anyone else who would like to add to the conversation or provide other inputs on any of the other presentations?
Cloverly wanted to speak as well.
Cloverly, please go ahead.
Thanks, Bernie. Something that I know I've been discussing with some of my colleagues or friends even who've had similar just hurdles coming through the academic journey. And I know, just Lorian talking about support groups, we actually formed a PhD support group, but, just needing support or formulating something that students can find support in, or academics, even be it, academic moms, but that might be something that's quite useful. And then from there, strategies came about, like, we learned a lot about the Pomodoro technique, how to do a hell of a lot in 30 minutes of your day. That's one, all one has. But yeah, strategies and just support in that perspective. And also, like a lot of students that I have interacted with, confidence is an issue, be it coming from a home environment or a cultural environment, but just helping students along to get to a point of just, feeling confident enough to apply for a particular position, or speak up even, in particularly a gender imbalanced environment. So those are some of the issues that, we tackled quite a lot, especially going to a working and corporate environment. I'm not sure whether that's something or a platform that the CMR is looking into, or perhaps the university, where we can start to formulate these types of groups or support structures, and even a mentorship type program. I'm not sure if anything like that exists.
Thank you. I think there are research groups, and there is a lot of support that's offered from the university in terms of training and workshops and opportunities to learn for particularly postgraduates that I'm aware of. But yes, I think more of that and having those opportunities to support each other. There are also networks, outside networks, like Sandcore, that have a student group. So I think there are quite a few opportunities for that to take place. But like the Pomodoro technique, I learned from attending one of the postgraduate workshops that are on offer by the university. So I think it's making use of these opportunities. But what I also find is that a lot of times these opportunities are presented, and it's like providing an equal step ladder, but it doesn't necessarily mean everyone can access it in terms of numbers, or that the learning environment within the workshop suits everybody, because people are different and have different personalities and don't always function in like a networking group or a team. They need one-on-one. So I think it's also understanding different people are individuals. This is just from my experience. And I think we can learn from each other that has worked with our different student groups and the teams that we have set up, and the culture of even supervisors creating a team amongst their students, and a community of practice around your own research themes is something that I can highly recommend from my own experience. And I'm sure that many of us could share other similar experiences. But thank you for that, Cloverly. That's very important.
Thanks, Bernie.
We did try and have a pizza evening with our postgraduates last year when we didn't have lockdown, and only 2 arrived. And it was free pizza, free food. We always thought free food would attract everyone, and it never did. So we'll see. We'll try it again when we're allowed to sit in a restaurant comfortably and safely.
Did you offer wine with the pizza?
No, because we can't necessarily use our funding for wine.
Next time.
But free pizza was provided. Right. Anyone else have anything to say? I don't want to limit the conversation. I know it's a little bit more difficult when we're online. I just want to check in the chat if there's anything here. Right, so the people have had to leave, doing different things. Okay, perfect. There are no questions in the chat that I can see. If there are no hands, I think I'm not going to. I know working online. Oh, Jessica, yes, there is a hand there. Thank you. Yes, Jessica, go for it.
Bernie, I just quickly want to use this opportunity to thank you and the CMR for putting this together. I think I've met a few new people that I'm going to reach out to and have follow-up conversations with. And each one was very formidable and special in their own sense. But I really want to also just commend you. Last year was great when we were together physically, but thank you for making it possible, even though we are meeting virtually.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Yes, Lisa was saying that this has been amazing and the talks have been amazing on WhatsApp, multitasking as we go along. And yes, we would have loved to have met over breakfast, but we're really, really impressed and happy and blessed with the number of people who have attended, and for all of our speakers that have each brought something unique. But what I think that has touched me the most is that everybody has brought their own personal touch and a little bit of themselves, and have been willing to share a little bit from their perspective. I, for one, personally, I think have found that touching, and I'm very grateful for. And we need to have more opportunities like this to inspire, support, and listen to each other, and be there to support. If I had known about not having a place to sleep, I would have opened my home and given you a place to sleep, and a knife and a fork and a spoon. And I think if we speak up and we ask for help, which is something very difficult for us to do sometimes, there is a helping hand close by. So I think as CMR, we hope to provide that helping hand as a research platform, and for engaging with the community and the science community going into the future as well. As I mentioned, the talks will be available on our webpage. So for those who would like to go back, connect, look at specific slides, please do so. I hope everyone is safe. I hope everyone is coping. I know we tell ourselves we are, but I know some are not. Thank you. Greetings from Namibia. Thank you so much for joining. It's wonderful to have you and connecting with us. And I wish us all the strength to continue with this year and to be able to support our staff, our colleagues, and the students that we engage and interact with going forward. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to those who participated in the poll. It was a lot of fun. And last but not least, I really would like to thank Lisa, who brought the creativity and the brainchild behind the theme and putting everything together. She really has amazing